Hey guys, Mrhappy here, and today I want to do a guide about turn 1 of the Binding Coil of Bahamut, currently the hardest raid in the game as of patch 2.0. Depending on when you watch this video, that may or may not be the case. People have been requesting it, so here it is. So after entering the raid, you're going to come to a few cutscenes, which I've left out for spoiler purposes, and you'll immediately come to the first boss, the Allegan defense system, aka the ADS. He's got low health, he cannot be stunned, but he can be silenced, and keep that in mind. So he's got 3 moves. High Voltage is the first one. It's a full room AoE that deals moderate lightning damage and paralyzes all targets hit. This paralyze cannot be dispelled. Repelling Cannons is a melee range AoE that deals moderate damage to high damage to any target hit, and Piercing Laser picks a random target and after a short delay fires a laser in that player's direction. It has a minimum distance which may cause ADS to move while targeting a player, and we'll keep that in mind when we talk strategy a little bit later. He will also summon one of several adds. Despite their names, which can be anything from attack node to defense node to disposal node to sanitary node, they all have the same moveset, so don't try to change your strategy according to which one that spawns. So the adds have only 2 moves. They do not have High Voltage or Piercing Laser, but they are small adds that auto attack for even more than the big boss does. They hit for about 1500 to 2500 damage, and they use a new move called Dirty Cannons, which is basically Repelling Cannons, but it casts extremely quickly. It's pretty fast, so avoiding it is really hard. So if an ad gets too close to ADS, a tether will appear between them, similar to the tether from Mrhappy Keep, and shortly after ADS will absorb the node. This absorption restores his HP and gives him a stacking buff that will increase his damage. Keep this mechanic in mind for the next boss after ADS, hint hint. The final mechanic of this fight is the time limit. When you start the fight, it will alert you that a charge will be complete in 4 clicks. This is an indicator of the time limit. 1 click is 1 minute. Should the boss ever reach 0 clicks, he will power up to full and begin AoEing the raid for an unhealable amount of damage. Do not let him get down to this point. So the strategy for this boss is actually quite simple. Since the ADS can be silenced, I recommend bringing 2 silencers for High Voltage. Do not silence any other move. You absolutely need someone to silence on the pull because he will start the fight immediately with High Voltage, so as soon as you see it cast, silence it while the tanks are getting enmity. Most jobs have a cooldown on their silence of about 30 seconds, so alternating between the silencer on the pull and another silencer makes short work of this mechanic. After the initial pull, it is also entirely possible for a monk to solo silence ADS with Arm of the Destroyer. You just need somebody to do that initial one so the monk can go around his forms and get back into the form for Arm of the Destroyer. Just remember, High Voltage happens every 15 to 18 seconds. So ADS will always follow the same pattern after that first High Voltage. He will always start with High Voltage, then do Repelling Cannons, and then do Piercing Laser, and repeat. This makes preparing for his moves pretty easy once you've seen them once or twice. To avoid Repelling Cannons, simply move out of the short range AoE, and to dodge Piercing Laser, simply move out of its red indicator if it selects you or somebody nearby. Remember that the arena is incredibly narrow, so make sure you have a setup that gives you enough breathing room to dodge sideways for the Piercing Lasers. About 40 seconds into the fight, ADS will summon his first ad, and every 40 seconds to 60 seconds after this, he will summon another one. Remember, names don't really matter here, they'll still just do auto attacks plus Dirty Cannons combo. It's recommended a second tank move to pick up these ads preemptively to ensure it doesn't go for the healers, as they do have an incredibly fast move speed. At this point, you have 2 options. Either everyone except the 2 silencers can focus their efforts onto the ad and kill it before moving back onto the boss, or the second tank can hold this ad and the next ad that comes out while the rest of the party burns down the boss, of course still silencing High Voltage every time it comes up. The DPS requirement for this strategy is not really that high, so being in mostly Darklight with some Mrhappy Keep gear and your relic, you should be fine as long as you know your rotations and you can safely avoid things like Piercing Laser and Repelling Cannons. Still, a few things to keep in mind when doing either strategy. First one is that the off tank will likely get hit even harder than the main tank, so rotating defensive cooldowns helps tremendously. I recommend using a Paladin for the burn strategy as an off tank so you can make use of hollowed ground. Also, the next thing is, due to high incoming damage from the ads, since the damage from them will generally be higher, whichever healer is healing the off tank the most should be cautious about their aggro since there will be a high healing requirement, thus healing aggro will be high. Additionally, ADS occasionally picks the off tank for Piercing Laser, and since the ad comes out on the opposite side of the room where you entered the room as a matter of fact, it can cause him to reposition to fire, which I mentioned earlier. Piercing Laser has a minimum distance. You can combat this by moving a bit closer to the boss with the ad, so just make sure you aren't within about 20 yalms of the boss or the tether will happen. Mind you, it is entirely possible to break the tether before he absorbs the node, so kill the boss with whichever strategy works best for you, and congratulations, You get to move on. There's no loot from this boss, guys. He was simply the gatekeeper for the rest of the coil. After a short but interesting cutscene, which again I'll skip here for spoiler purposes, you come to a long path with a lot of trash mobs. Nothing special about these. Depending on your gear, you can either tank them all in AoE, or you can tank them and sleep them just to handle them more safely. There are some monsters patrolling back and forth, such as pelicans, that can do a conal petrify breath, so be sure the tanks pick these up and dodge the breath. At some point, you'll reach a golem protecting a doorway. Simply killing this golem will open the gate. These golems have just two major mechanics. They have a conal move that they'll do, which can do anywhere from 2 to 5k on the tank. It comes with no warning, so just rotate defensive cooldowns while you're fighting them. Additionally, they will cast Obliterate, which cannot be interrupted. This move will do 2,500 to 3,500 damage to everyone in the party, so be sure to have Stone Skin and Protect on. Also, unless you're really confident in your health, avoid using Blood for Blood DPS. After disposing of the first one, you'll come to some more trash mobs. Up the hill on the side, there are some Coils and Pugils. After killing them, you can walk down the other side to get a chest. To this date, I've not seen a single piece of loot come from this chest or any other chest like it in later turns. You can open it for the potions and whatever not, or you can just open it like I do every week, just hoping there will be a piece of gear inside. Just one day, I know there's going to be something in that chest. Anyway, moving on from my hopes and dreams. You'll reach Golem 2 once you double back and go up the path a little bit further. He's exactly the same as Golem 1, so just dispose of him in the same way you did the first one. After that, you're on to turn 1's first true boss, Caduceus. Caduceus is a fight that uses mechanics that involve splitting the party and their focus while testing how well they can control the very field they stand on. As you start to pull, you'll notice that the crystal path you're standing on as you run into the fight begins to glow ominously. Standing on these crystal paths anytime after the encounter starts will cause you to bleed for 500 to 600 damage per tick. This is a path similar to the one in the front. There's a similar one in the back of the room, so keep that in mind for the strategies later. First, we'll go over Caduceus' standard moveset. He auto-attacks his target as well as performs a very awkward conal move called Hood Swing. This move will come instantly with no warning, very similar to Mountain Buster from Titan, except even less predictable. And its cone is a good deal wider than most cones. Being anywhere in front of Caduceus in a 180-degree manner puts you in major risk of getting destroyed by this move. So be careful when doing moves on his flank. For anyone who's doing flank moves, try and lean towards the back of his flank as opposed to the immediate side of him. He also has a tail swipe move that sits on about a 10-second cooldown. Melee DPS can trigger this move, avoid it, and then move back behind him to do any rear moves that they were trying to do in the first place. Triggering this tail swipe also relieves the tank from damage for a short time while he charges it, so even if you don't need to do moves from the rear, it's alright to do them from there anyway, just to relieve the tank from some damage for a short time. And finally, he spits poison at select targets, dealing damage over time. They're small, so just move out of them as soon as possible and reposition yourself. So shortly after the fight starts, Caduceus will charge himself with a stacking buff that will increase his damage dealt. This effect stacks up to 8 times. To counter this mechanic, shortly after he gives himself a stack, a semi-random pattern of platforms around the room will light up and begin charging. Here's a map on the screen of the different patterns of platforms that can light up. As you can see, the 2 top platforms past the crystals can also light up, meaning you may want to station one player up there on each side just in case sometime after the fight starts. Other than that, hope you love my awesome Microsoft Paint skills. The matching colors signify one of the patterns, so there's just a few different patterns here. And I believe that's yellow. The yellow pads indicate the crystal pads that lead up to the top platforms. So, other than that, after a short time, a dark matter slime will spawn under any player standing on the lit up platforms and attack only the player that spawned them until either the player dies or the slime dies. In order to deal with the slime, bring it close to Caduceus, and it will cause it to eat the slime. Feeding the slime to Caduceus will cause him to lose a stack of his buff and heal him based on a remaining percentage of HP that the slime had before being fed. This means you will want to DPS the slime down to about 10 to 20% before feeding it to Caduceus. Also, try to ensure only one person is spawning a slime, as it will spawn one slime for every person that is on this platform, and you really don't want to get too many slimes and feed Caduceus, bringing his HP back up, or just making the fight even harder to deal with. So, another thing is, for this reason, it is important to position your tanks near the edges of 2 set platforms so that they can move off the platform they are on if it lights up without hood swinging the raid. These are the 2 recommended positions that I recommend using, and you'll see why I recommend 2 positions very, very shortly. But first, I'll talk about these slimes and the few mechanics that they have other than being fed. The first is the most important. The slimes will explode if you get too far away from them, dealing massive AoE damage to the raid. Should this be in range of the tank, the combined damage of the slime plus Caduceus will likely kill him. More importantly, I should say, this means that the slime cannot be fed to Caduceus to remove a stack if it blows up. To make matters worse, Caduceus will prioritize spitting on the slime's target in an attempt to kill them or tempt them to move faster and out of range to cause an explosion. He will also use the spit move more rapidly while slime is alive, so that target is going to need increased healing. Finally, the slimes place a strong movement speed slowing their target after a few seconds. This effect can and should be dispelled. A helpful hint: someone triggering the tail swipe before the slime's target runs into melee range gives them a lot more room to kite the slime into Caduceus. This pattern will continue until 66%, when Caduceus will split into 2 snakes, each with 33% of Caduceus' max HP. When this happens, the stacks that were not successfully removed will also be transferred. Sometimes the second snake has the same number of stacks, and sometimes it just has one less. Just play by ear with this one. Try and get him at 0 stacks before you force the split. So, what's next? Additionally, snakes will also have a determination down debuff, meaning that each snake will do reduced damage. One of the snakes will still be holding aggro onto the tank that held Caduceus through phase 1. So it's recommended that a different tank pick up the new Caduceus. Once both tanks have aggro, one tank needs to drag their snake away to the opposite side of the room. Again, showing this platform image, this is one of the recommended positions that you can use. There are other positions. Find what's most comfortable for your raid composition and your tanks. When this happens, you have 2 things to keep in mind. One is that it's easier for the tank that has more hate to kite Caduceus. It gives the other tank, the one that has brand new hate on Caduceus, plenty of time to stand still and generate hate on him. So that's one thing I recommend doing, but again, that's up to you. The other thing is that the reason you split them is because if the 2 snakes are too close to each other, after about 10 or 15 seconds, they will merge back together, combining their health and making Caduceus very, very angry. When this happens, he will begin automatically charging his stacking buff up to 8. He will have no delay on it anymore. So I'm telling you right now, nobody will survive a single hit from him at this many stacks without hollowed ground. So you must not let this happen. Additionally, if either snake is killed earlier than the other one, the remaining snake will enrage and will begin charging his stacking buff up to 8 times as well. So you want to kill both of these snakes at approximately the same time, as close together as possible. At this point, the fight becomes about managing the exact same mechanics as phase 1, except on 2 separate snakes. Both Caduceus will spit poison, use hood swing, tail swipe, and stack their own damage buff, but they'll do it at the same time. Since both must die at the same time, your raid must orchestrate how they are going to handle the damage, though the most common method is 2 DPS on one and 2 DPS on the other. Additionally, you'll likely need to work with your healers to find out who is going to be healing which tank primarily. The entire purpose of this mechanic is to split up your party into 4 and 4. At this point, we come to a decision again, very similar to the decision we made about ADS back in turn 1. Or back earlier in turn 1, I should say. At this point, you have to make this decision. Either you can DPS them both down without feeding them any slimes, but this will require your tanks to rotate their defensive cooldowns and for the healers to be on their toes. Or if your raid's DPS is not high enough to do this safely, then you can continue to use the same strategy in phase 1, except now you will want to pop 2 slimes instead of 1 and feed 1 slime to each snake. How your raid handles this is entirely up to your raid composition. It is usually best for a ranged job such as Bard, Black Mage, or Summoner to pop the slimes and handle them while potentially calling on another DPS to help them if necessary. However, people have done this with all melee compositions, and all you do is you have one melee grab a slime and you have both melees DPS them down as quickly as possible, down to 10-20%, and then feed the slime and then get back on the boss. It is not that difficult to do. But find out what works best for your raid composition, and don't feel the need to change your composition based on how others win the fight. It is more about your individual player skill and teamwork capabilities than it is about your composition. The biggest issue some players may have with this fight is the platforms up top of the crystal paths. If you have 2 range that can stand up there, it's really easy. If you don't, you sort of have to play things by ear. There are 2 ways to handle this as well. It is entirely possible to sprint up there as a melee and pop a slime before kiting it off the platform. You can have a ranged station at the top if you have them, or you can choose to just simply ignore those slimes and deal with the 1 extra stack and hope that RNG is on your side, because it is also entirely possible that you may get 3 spawns up there in a row and have no slimes to deal with the boss. No matter what, someone is going to have to deal with the bleed from the crystal at some point if you decide to pop the slimes up there, which is why sprint to get up there quicker so you bleed for less damage is useful, especially considering you're going to have to deal with spit and slime auto attacks very soon after you go up that path and get hit by the bleed. Other than that, nothing really changes from phases 1 to 2, other than having to deal with every mechanic twice now. So I've really given you all the hints that I can think of. Congratulations on your turn 1 victory, and I hope you have some awesome loot. Hint, hint, paladin body. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, favorite, subscribe, and share for more Final Fantasy XIV information and guides. Also, feel free to follow me on Facebook and Twitter. There are links in the description below. You can follow me there and ask me questions if you have any. I would be happy to answer them. You can also reach out to me on YouTube, but I have a harder time getting back to those just because Google Plus doesn't like to actually show me it very much. But anyway, guys, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time, take care. Oh, by the way, don't forget about the sacrificial monk.